Hello everyone, welcome to some questionable commentary featuring myself, Brad, or Bradsford I guess, and Alex. Hi Alex.
Hello.
We're both from the Pioneer perspective, and we are going to be doing, like the name suggests, questionable commentary over random MTGO online lobbies in the practice rooms, because that is the only thing we're actually allowed to watch. We can't just go into leagues and like watch random games there. That'd be kind of cool though. So when are we going to get an update to MTGO? What the fuck?
I guess it prevents tournament scouting.
That's stupid. I recently went to an RC Cube, which I'll talk about more on the next episode of the Pioneer perspective. But like, when I finished early, like on a quick 2-0, I walked around the room and scouted what the fuck people were playing. So, the fuck.
Yeah, but I don't think in the tournament, but like when people prepare for larger tournaments, you know, you could be like, from league data, you might be able to scrap like, this is the deck that Gabriel Nassif has been testing, and now you're up against him, and then you can guess what his deck. This was a scandal a couple years ago in Smogon in competitive Pokemon, because this was used in a tournament, like a big tournament was coming up, and someone had used a bot that would very rapidly go through like every game that was being played and note like who the players are and what their team was. And they could use that to get like, I'm playing in this big tournament against these, like my one team is like, our team is playing against these 3 people. So the bot can tell us what the expected team is that they're going to use, and then you can prepare accordingly, which in Pokemon is massive because you can really like blow people out.
Oh, yeah,
there's
matchups
very obvious holes in every team.
Exactly.
Like not knowing that like, you know, I mean, not going on a tangent for Pokemon, but that like certain coverage moves that like hit like a certain counter, if you know your opponent's Pokemon doesn't have that, you can like for sure you play very differently.
And there's typings
and
as
you
well.
can just
like,
completely
type,
like you could completely blow people out. It's like, the only attacking move you have is like a ground move, so if I have a flying Pokemon, that means I can't be hit by you. And if I know that you only have a ground move, I can just switch that Pokemon in freely, knowing it'll never take damage. And like that type of thing is huge in Pokemon. So I guess that's probably a similar reason why they only allow you to scout random games when people allow you to. However, they could still just like give people a toggle and be like, I'm playing a league, I don't care if people watch, or I'm playing a league, I care if people watch. But
could you imagine if Magic had that where it's like red is like weaker, like red is weaker to blue, because it's, you know, fire and water.
Brad, everything is weaker to blue.
I don't know, man. Red seems like the enemy for blue. Also, speaking of which, blue's getting a nice buff over in the Explorer Anthology. They released the 3 cards that are going to be out of the 20 in the next Explorer Anthology, and it's Kalitas, Favored Hoplite, and Supreme Verdict are confirmed. So
wonderful. Sure, we'll get into that in the cast, but let's stick to what we're actually doing, Brad. We are not on a Pioneer perspective, even though it feels that way because it's us recording over Discord. Let's actually get into our questionable commentary over what are we watching.
All right, so we're watching Space Coyote _65, So Close to Greatness, against Dead Baby Unicorn. And I know Dead Baby Unicorn...
Love the album.
Yeah. Is on Rakdos Sac, and it's going to be versus Grixis Midrange. So let's go ahead and get going. So we have Dead Baby Unicorn on Rakdos Sac on the play, it looks like. And he's going to lead off with a Den of the Bugbear with a Witch's
Best
Oven.
land in the game.
And for those of you who have not watched our commentary, listened to our commentary before, while we see a Water Grave from Space Coyote and a Thoughtseize, pretty much the normal way we do it is I usually go with the play-by-play commentary, and Alex is usually here for the color commentary because he offers a little bit more insight with the lines and things like that, as we see a Fable the Mirror Breaker hit the bin, which, you know, Alex, there's that little bit of a disparity between Rakdos Sac lists, and it's do you play Fable or do you play Ob Nixilis? Or pretty much the differences between the 3 drops. What would you lean more towards?
It really depends on the build of the deck. We've seen if Rakdos Sacrifice in its old forms had a bit more, you know, the Deadly Disputes and the Priest of the Forgotten Gods. And that deck could already have enough to go into, and they have enough to do Sacrifice with, but maybe not enough to like go a bit bigger with, where Fable's very good, or that draw filtering can be important. Ob Nixilis works really well with cards like Unlucky Witness.
Yeah.
So the moment I put an Unlucky Witness in the deck, I would very much like to put an Obnixilis in my deck. That's like one of the things I'd be looking at when I'm deciding to put Obnixilis in. Though I do think Fable of the Mirror Breaker is the better standalone card. So
we see a little bit of pass and go so far as an opt and end step, and then a hard cast Bunkers Giant. They'd rather. It's weird though. I guess they know they're against sack, so they didn't sack in Steam Vents to get value on end step. They went for the opt instead of like going stomp face. But so far the sack players just kind of been like Witch's Oven, and that's all I got. They were really leaning on that Fable, it seems, for the turn 3 play.
Yeah, they probably either had a very heavy hand or a very land heavy hand, thinking like, oh, I have a turn 1 play, no turn 2 play that I might draw because the deck has a very low curve. And then I have my 3 mana play, and my 3 mana play is gonna find me a turn 4 play with that Rummage 2 ability that it has. Mm-hmm. So Fable of the Mirror Breaker really throwing a wrench in the plan there.
And Bone Crusher comes in. Looks like he's gonna get a nice connection. 16-16. And do we see anything else from the Grixis player on main 2? Looks like no, but
a little surprised to see Opt in this deck anyway and not Consider.
True.
Could be that there's more. They're all more than 4 Consider. Consider definitely like the kind of card you want to be running here.
Yeah. And we see a cycle of the Sogazan with some 1/1s, which is great for the sack. Now they have the block and activate Witch's Oven if they want to buy themselves a turn. Looks like they're
given
passing,
that this also gives
they're
them
swinging
food.
in, going aggressive. I like it.
I was like thinking that this also gives them food. This could easily buy them like 3 or 4 turns against this Bone Crusher Giant clock, which just buys them a ton of time, but not doing anything.
Well, there's
now.
your Consider, Alex.
Well, there you go. I can imagine a possible play if you're really flooded, though that's also an incentive to keep the manland, but that they're threatening to animate the Den and block the Bone Crusher with it.
Yeah.
And then if they go for a removal spell on the Den in response to try and nullify that, then it can still be sacked for a food. Though I don't know if I like that use of a Den of the Bugbear, or if I would have activated in my turn and try and go for the race.
So there looks like they're just sacking a token and going for the life gain, trying to make it a
could sack a food, go for the Fatal Push, see if that happens before.
There it is.
Oh, they don't even have to sack the food, they just got the Revolt already. So yeah, that's obviously also a good way of dealing with it. Still have the mana left to now use that food if they want to.
We see a Thing in the Ice, so it seems like they are on the 4 Consider plan if they're going double Thing in the Ice, actually.
Ooh.
So we see some nice blockers here, but against Rakdos
Very
Sac,
threatening board.
But against Rakdos Sac, the blockers don't mean that much when you can just ping down your opponent. And we see a sacrifice of the food, gain some life, so 17-14. Guess buying some time against these these things in the ice, because they will be swinging in soon. They got 3 cards in hand from Grixis, and only 1 card in hand, and it was a Fatal Push, so there goes one of the Fables. Well, 2, now down to 1. My apologies. I keep referring to Thing in the Ice as Fable.
The Thing in the Ice being a really big threat here. Obviously, I went back up to 17 because of the food, but those 2 Thing in the Ice together, because when the card flips, it bounces everything that isn't a horror, which means if you have multiple copies of Thing in the Ice, you can swing for 14 or 21, depending on how many copies you have. As we see Treasure Cruise for like the perfect refill, and this is where we kind of see where Grixis decks in general want to be in these kind of matchups, where the Thoughtseize came out of the Grixis deck, but it can often come out of the Rakdos Sac deck, and they try and sort of nickel and dime 1-for-1 you, and eventually they will find some way to have card advantage, and they'll try and bury you. And both decks, in a way, are trying to do the same thing. So a card like Treasure Cruise is something that can really net you a ton here, obviously also drawing you the spells to now potentially flip the Thing in the Ice, which is going to present a pretty decent clock. Even if the food gets sacked here, like you make sack a token, make a food, get you up to 20. That's still a 3-turn clock from the Thing in the Ice, while you already have more cards in your hand, so you're applying the pressure too. So
yeah, and we
not
see
looking good for the Rakdos player at this point.
Yeah, it looks like a huge advantage. I mean, 5 cards to 1 card in hand, Thing in the Ice on board, 3 open mana with a lot of single spells, single cost spells in the Grixis deck, I'm sure, as we already seen the ops and considers.
Yeah, this is where you want to see like an Unlucky Witness, casualty it with Ob, and then the Unlucky Witness finds you like a push and you kill the thing in the eyes. You're going to try and like stabilize from there while having, obviously a big idea is if you have a bunch of cards in your hand, that doesn't matter if your opponent has more cards on the board. So I think something like Niv, Unlucky Witness, get rid of that thing in the eyes, have those Planeswalkers tick up. That's the type of thing that could get in the mirror. But they're passing with 3 mana up. So there might just be a counterspell on this Grixis player's hand.
Yeah. Only 1 card in hand. They find the cat. That's a really big draw. Cat.
Especially because there already is a food in play.
Yeah.
So that means even you can... Even without the food in play, actually, the cat can sort of duck and dive around the thing in the ice's bounce effect, but just being sacked, trigger resolves, and then you get it back.
Cycling a Triome here. Oh. That tells me their hand kind of bricked.
It's not very good.
Yeah, if they held a 3 mana just cycle on end step instead of having the spells to immediately flip thing, they only needed 2 more spells with 3 of a mana. That doesn't seem too hard in this deck.
Yeah, it can also be just a matter of mana efficiency. Like they might have had 2 1-mana spells, but they're leaving a mana over. Like there'll be a mana left that they might not be able to spend on anything.
So push targeting the cat. I mean,
that's just to flip the thing.
Yeah, sack and response. We're not worried about that. We're looking at the triggers.
Not a play I'm too keen on though. Basically because this Cauldron Familiar is going to be able to block this thing in the ice forever, which means that until I have a way to deal with the Cauldron Familiar, I have no interest in going for the thing in the ice flip.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, you're in Grixis, so you have access to things like Prismari Command and K Command, which I wouldn't be surprised if either of those were in the main. I think the way you attack Rakdos Sac in this situation is less worry about Cauldron Familiar, because Cauldron Familiar is so easy to dodge stuff, like graveyard removal, because like target it or whatever engrave, they just bring it back or whatever.
Targeting removal doesn't work if there's an extra food in play, so you need like a graveyard wipe, which Grixis basically never has game 1 because no one runs a card like Rakdos Charm.
But
especially
a shatter effect would be a better way to go about getting around the cat. Because
or something like a Kalidas that like blanket stops that like sacrifice loop.
We need to start bringing Cry of the Canarium into another Treasure Cruise, so they're going to go up to 7 cards in hand as they flip this thing. It's going to get blocked, unfortunately, but I mean, this is a lot of pressure. 7-1 in terms of cards in hand, now 6 as they play a tap land. I mean...
Yeah, this is looking a little rough for the Rakdos players still, but honestly, they're not out of it. They can find a card like, depending on how the deck list looks, like a card like Deadly Dispute, given that they have all these food tokens lying around, and potentially the cat they could sack, but they'd probably rather just sack that for a food. But, with all these extra resources lying around.
There's a stomp.
That means the thing's going to come in for 7, but...
They can still sack the food and block, because we're still in the attack step.
Yeah, but then how are they going to get another food to bring the cat back? If they now block this thing in the eyes with the cat, they have to find another way to get a food.
True.
Which the fact that they block makes me think that they probably do.
They can be aggressive. They're tapped out from the Grixis side. They can go Hive or Den, activate, swing in, and then sack it, and then start the loop again. And then you'll have a Goblin
get
or whatever.
You could, you don't sack the land. You just swing with the Den of the Bugbear and sack the Goblin token.
You're right.
You get.
Yeah, exactly.
But then still, that means you no longer have a tapped... I feel like going about the line this way gives your opponent windows that they can blow you out with a card like Cling to Dust, Soulguide Lantern. Mm-hmm. Something that could reasonably be in a main deck. I feel like this gives your opponent a lot of windows, where if you just take that 7 Lester, which you can, you'd be at 13.
They can take it now, too.
Means that you can... Yeah... I think it was better to take it last turn, but still taking it now, I think this is just a little cleaner. But still, because there's no food around now, at one point, if you tap the oven, you can be blown up by Cling to Dust. Like, if they would tap the oven now, try and get a food, this is an opportunity for the cat to be sniped, but luckily they don't. Well, luckily for Dead Baby Unicorn.
Now you have to remember, Alex.
Not a thing I expected I would say today. Lucky for Dead Baby Unicorn.
You have to remember, though, Alex, they're not you, so they're not going to be playing main deck what's the card? The Snipe from Theros.
Cling to Dust.
Yeah, Cling to Dust.
That's a card people play.
In the main? In the
Yeah,
Grixis
sometimes.
Midrange?
The Mir. Maybe not a mid-range, but mid-range players are also like suckers for value.
As you see the Mayhem Devil come down, this is really big, and this is a way that they can easily grind out, and they can block forever, pretty much.
I mean, they're already sending them to 2 if they just go for it now.
Yeah.
Right? Ping to 3, drain to 1,
And
now you've got...
Deadly
you're still
Dispute.
presenting your Kedovan.
If they have Deadly Dispute in hand, they can sack one, make a treasure, and then sack, and then they got game. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah. Bit surprised that the 5-card Grixis hand had nothing here.
Yeah.
But that is kind of, in the context of these kind of decks, this is kind of the Dig Through Time versus Treasure Cruise thing for you.
Yeah.
Where, like, this went 6 cards deep in total. Dig Through Time would have gone 14 deep, and is much more likely to, like, find you, like, your one-off Kolaghan's Command or something that you can probably find in the main decks of these type of decks.
This also just showcases the grindiness and the power level of Rakdos Sac, being able to crawl back from facing Double Thing in the Ice, finding your Fatal Push to make it 1, having literally nothing. Now, that top deck of the Cat was what got the game going, right? That's what saved them. They don't find the Cat there, they're pretty much dead, unless they find another push or something like that to deal with the Thing in the Ice. But yeah, Rakdos is a really good deck. Looking at siding, what are you thinking? Let's look at Grixis first. What are you trying to see from them bringing in? We don't know their sideboards, but what would you expect?
Yeah, definitely. If there's any form of artifact destruction, I would probably want to bring that in a card like Abrade, Kolaghan's Command. If that's in your sideboard, I would want it here to deal with the Oven predominantly, but especially if it's like an Abrade that can also kill a Mayhem Devil or another card. Otherwise, I don't know if... I mean, Leyline's very uncommon. I probably wouldn't bring that in even, because
very
it's also
narrow.
a bad top deck in a matchup. It's a bad top deck in a matchup that can get very grindy.
Yeah. Kalidas, maybe, if they're not running that main.
Yeah, Kalidas could definitely work for that sort of blanket catch shot of while also just being a powerful card. Though it does die to push, which is a card your opponent's encouraged to keep in.
Yeah.
But then again, if once you bring in 12 push targets, then dice to push becomes less of an argument than if you have 3 cards that would die to Fatal Push.
One thing
something like Soul Guide Lantern is something you could consider, but I think is bad because your opponent can play around it really easily with the Cats combo.
Yeah, no turn 1 play from either player, just tap land. And one thing worth noting is to see a Hall of Storm Giants come in and a Thing in the Ice on turn 2 for our Grixis opponent. No companion for Rakdos Sac, no Giganta, which either could be a deck building choice because they're actually running
Did they reveal it game 1?
No, they didn't reveal it in game 1 either. So
Think of what card that could be.
There's an Unlucky Witness and that's a great play for turn 2. Unlucky Witness, Witch's Oven. So end step, sack
well, if you're the Grixis player, you're probably tempted to kill the Unlucky Witness now. Because the exile on Unlucky Witness, as far as I know, is this turn only.
It's not. It's
more
the
like
next
old
end step.
Is it until the end of your the next end step? So that would be the Grixis player's end step if they kill it now.
The player's end step of like the owner. So it's your end step. So you can sack it. He can sack it right now on end step, and then Unlucky Witness still is good for his whole next turn. It's a great card.
Damn. Oh yeah, until your next end step. That's nuts.
And we see a
Eden Alive,
which is a great card in this deck, by the way. Really good with the exile ability. Great against like mono green. I've actually been looking to play more copies of it in the 75 in my Rakdos list.
Yeah, just Spark Harvest, but better, basically.
So we're seeing this list is foregoing the Voldaren Epicure in place of the Blood Harvester. I've seen that as well. You're either looking at 4 of that 1 drop for the Blood Generation or the 2 drop. I think there's merit to both. In my playing, the 1 damage from the Voldaren Epicure is actually pretty big a lot of times. It actually goes further than you would think. But meanwhile, I mean, on an empty board, as the so consider and Tainted Indulgence from Grixis. On an empty board, swinging in with the Harvester does present more damage overall than...
Yeah, I feel like Harvester is just a card that gets you. Because you're so busy dealing with all this small, like, you're dealing with an oven, you want to see if you can have, like, an exile effect for an Unlucky Witness, maybe. Like, there's all these different things you're trying to go for, and then this 3-2 just kind of gets you there. But
yeah. Are we going to see
the Chandra? Obviously a pretty clean answer, but is able to sack it for a food, so there is some value to be had here.
Mm-hmm.
But this is 0 pressure going at Chandra at the moment, which is a pretty good place to deploy it. Though, I think Mayhem Devil's probably the one card that they could use here. Play a land, sack the blood, ping the Chandra.
Yeah, that'd be a really good play.
Especially if they had another land,
and
they could have also...
Ob Nixilis. They're playing both Ob and both Fable as well, which I do like. They still get the
cool.
sack
They're
on
gonna...
Witch's Oven, ping it.
Yeah, they sack the devil and then ping. That's pretty cool.
Little weird, though.
Yeah, that's I was a bit surprised they could have cycled the Sokans on, but this works. But that does mean there's no casualty on Ob Nixilis, so...
There's Kalidas.
Like, even though we see Ob Nixilis down now, one Ob Nixilis on 1 loyalty is a really weak Planeswalker to be deploying early.
Yeah.
Right, your opponent will take 2, and then like, kind of whatever. The power really comes into multiples, so if they had another land to play, they could have channeled the Sokans on, killed Chandra with combat damage, and they could have used that in order to have then like an opportunity for double Nixilis the turn after.
Mm-hmm. So now they're looking for an answer to this Kalidas. They did get Revolt on, so they could potentially, as we see, a Go Blank. So that gets them down to 1 card in hand, exiles their yard, so that does, help turn off Cruise, as we see the opponent opt in response. But we do see the line, or the way that the Rakdos player wanted to curve out. You could see they go turn 2 Blood Tithe Harvester, then swing in for 3, and then they could sack it and main 2 for Ob, double Ob. That's really good.
Also, they haven't played a land yet, and that makes me think they probably didn't have one. Which means, obviously, the Chandra killer with Sokats online wouldn't have worked, Because I think otherwise, you probably play the land here, so they can't spell Pierce or Go Blank, because you've got the treasure and the land. So that made me feel like there wasn't a land in their hand, and now Ob Nixilis dies, so there's also no Fatal Push, which would have been a very good answer to Kalidas.
And a Fable for Grixis, great card.
Currently looking... I mean, we had the same in the first game, and they're on 0 cards in hand now, and the Rakdos player is at 4.
I will say, though...
But the Grixis player has more boards, so they're and no man lands from the Rakdos deck.
True.
So it's looking pretty okay again for Grixis.
And I know you want to play that land to eventually get towards being able to activate Hall. They need 1 more land for that, but I would have maybe held on to that Watery Grave instead of playing it tapped, just for the possibility of looting with Fable.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because then there's a Mayhem Devil. That's a pretty good draw. They can kill Kalidas this turn, right? Claim. That's great. Claim is fantastic. So swing in, make a treasure.
Now they get a treasure, sack it for a food, and then they can even use the treasures to pay to sack a food to gain life and kill Kalidas with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is fantastic.
A great line from Rakdos, and I
especially because the front half of the saga, like the token, is a non-token, which means it doesn't trigger Kalidas, so they don't get a zombie out of it.
Yeah, that's really big.
But yeah, your point about the mirror, keeping the land in hand, I do agree, especially for something like Half Storm Giants in a deck like Grixis Midrange, which tends to be probably like a 24 land list. Half Storm Giants is a lot of mana to activate, which in a lot of situations I would consider like a little bit of an afterthought, right?
Yeah.
Because you played the land now, but even if you get to play, you draw a land and you get to activate the Half Storm Giants, that's still like a 7/7 that's just going to get chumped by some random token, right? So it's not that good. Obviously, it's a great finisher once you get to like later parts of the game and you've got nothing to do with your mana, but I would never be actively working towards it. Because the situation now is that you draw a land for turn, and then you can play Half Storm Giants. But if I would have not played a land last turn, I draw a land for turn, I think I'm way better off pitching those 2 lands, trying to find some gas, rather than having to play both of them to activate the hull, because that's basically using two quote-unquote could-be spells in order to start activating the hull, which you might have to start holding back as a blocker at this point, which is horrendous.
Yeah, we see them pitch a land, Stormguard Coast, off of the Fable. And
yeah,
that
makes me think even more that they should have just... If they're going to pitch a land, if they draw it, they're not even on the idea of activating hull, so why keep the land last turn?
So giving value to Unlucky Witness by stomping it. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they thought, just like you did, that only until the next end step. I don't really see the point in stomping it here.
I could see the point. I think you want... I think it's the idea that the 2 damage to face might not matter as much in the long run.
We see another
you're
Unlucky
looking to
Witness
stomp now. Gosh.
From the exile, from the original one.
Because you kind of want, like... You want to give less agency to your opponent. Which is why I can see a point for stomping it now, because you're going to give your opponent a card and be like, all right, you're going to have to pick now from this witness and play it next turn, which takes some agency out of your opponent instead of keeping the witness back, maybe blocking with it next turn, then sacking it in combat, and like giving them more options, and stomping it now forces them to act now.
Yeah. So we see a lot of card draw here. Weird that they're continually going face with Man Devil. I mean, they could have... because they found claim. That's really good. Get him for casual 7. And one thing... Oh, and another Witch's Oven is sack the 2 Witch's Ovens. So sack Bone Crusher Giant. This is a blowout play from...
Yeah. This game's pretty over at this point, I think. They're both at 0, but it's going to go down to 8. You're going to sack the Bone Crusher, put your opponent down to 7, get 2 foods because the Bone Crusher Giant has 4 power. So you're also just on 1 million food now.
And going back to that original play of that land drop with from Grixis with Watergrave instead of cycling it, I mean, it might not have made that much of a difference, but it digs you an extra card deep. And that plan of maybe activating Hull to get to that mana is even worse against Rakdos Sac, because if they find the sack fodder like they did with like Unlucky Witness or even Cat or whatever, you just block for days on the hull anyway, and then you're out an entire turn. You essentially time walk your opponent at that point.
And it's also a fatal push deck, which means once you're activating the hull for 7, basically for 7, because I think it's 6, but you also have to swing with it, your opponent can probably just push it and pay for it.
Oh, here's my favorite play. They're going to claim, and then they're going to copy Mayhem Devil for lethal. I love this. This is why... There's the win.
Yeah.
This is why Rakdos Sac has such an amazing Rakdos Midrange matchup, which is basically what it was, right? It's essentially a Rakdos Midrange matchup. And that was... I mean, look, we saw 2 games back-to-back from Rakdos Sac where they were effectively kind of pretty far behind on board both games at certain points. And then they just easily
the Grixis deck managed to get a lot of resources, but just didn't really match up well with the type of thing that this Rakdos deck is trying to be doing. Like, for example, they brought in a Kalidas, but the Rakdos deck kind of played around it pretty easily and then found an opportunity to kill Kalidas without any real casualties, and that, kind of just ended at that point. But to the point of that, like, Fable discard, because I do think it's pretty big, because 1 card deeper, but you're playing a Treasure Cruise deck. You just have to hit that 1 cruise, right? And we don't know what exactly was in this deck, but if there is an answer in there for Mayhem Devil, maybe you're playing like a 4-mana Nicol Bolas, which they can't claim the Firstborn because its CMC is above 3. Maybe you run like a Vandal Blast kind of card. You could have literally blown up all the ovens and all the treasures, and then you would have suddenly been in a great position. And getting that 1 card deeper can make a real big difference in mid-range and control strategies, because your deck has like an X number of these large haymaker cards, and that can be a very big difference in games where you do or do not find them. So even though 1 card deeper might not matter much, it could have honestly made a huge difference in this deck, depending on how the Grixis deck was built in this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I like the list. I like the idea of like taking some... it very much was reminiscent of a Rakdos mid-range list. One notable thing I didn't see which could have been a pretty decent threat, was Graveyard Trespasser from either games from Grixis. They could just not be playing it in their list. Of course, you know, in Moto, it's like a $25 card for some reason, thanks to the wonderful economy there. But you know, rental. But I mean, also that deck in general is not very cheap. Fable's pretty expensive and stuff like that. So they could just be renting it regardless.
I think another option in the Grixis deck could have been Pyromancer. Kind of try and take like is it Pyromancer, but try and turn it into a, you know, Grixis Pyromancer deck. We've seen that be a thing recently, maybe with Off One Mind or some more grindiness.
Which could have been an option as well.
Yeah, then you are heading in like a pretty different direction for the deck, because that might lead to like having to cut Bone Crusher Giant, or obviously Thing in the Ice doesn't go well with these cards.
Yeah, flipping all your
because
own
it bounces all your
tokens.
tokens. So that's probably the reason why they're on Thing. I'm just not 100% on Thing at the moment, because Winoda's gone, where the card was phenomenal. But with humans on the up and up, I could see Thing in the Ice being pretty good.
But then if you go against Ban and they just Reflector Mage your
they Reflector Mage it to oblivion.
Yeah, single counter left Thing, and you're like, well, that sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I thought that was a really good match. Again, showcases the grindiness and the potential of Rakdos Sac. I like the list a lot. From what we saw, it looked pretty stock. It looked like, you know, a bunch of Unlucky Witness, a bunch of Cats, a bunch of Ovens, Mayhem Devil, some Obs, some Fables, and Blood Harvester. Seems good to me. And from Grixis, I like the idea of it.
I think there's a couple of good sideboard cards, and again we saw like how to go one card deeper that could find you those potential sideboard cards. The matchup might not have looked very close, but I play a lot of Grixis Control, which in a lot of ways is similar to this mid-range deck, or definitely, you know, looking out of the sideboard or what you could fit in your main deck. You always have access to the same tools because you're in the same colors, and there are definitely some tools out there that could have kind of like 180 this matchup immediately. Against Shadow's Verdict, unlikely in this deck, but a Vandal Blast, which is a pretty reasonable card. You could definitely have one Vandal Blast in your sideboard. I don't think that would be particularly strange. A Braid is a reasonable card. Goligan's Command is a reasonable card. We saw in that first game where they had the Treasure Cruise, but they had to then cycle a Triome and then basically passed with 5 mana up and didn't do anything. That really made me think, like, either your draw was just really bad, like it really didn't line up, or there's just a couple tweaks you can make to your list where you reach a point where you kind of don't lose those matchups anymore.
Yeah, and there's plenty of sideboard options from Rakdos Midrange or like Grixis Midrange, and I'm using the two kind of, you know, interchangeably because it is pretty much the core is the same. Like Fable, Bone Crusher. I'm assuming Graveyard Trespasser, they just didn't see it. Just some more draw spells in blue and Thing in the Ice, but some sideboard cards and some other cards that they could look at in the future. Could be things like, you know, K-Command if they didn't play it or they just didn't have it. Cryolocranarium is an interesting one. That just immediately helps with your sack matchup in general. A little weaker in a lot of other matchups. Path of Peril is a good option, but not that great against sack. You know, so it's hard. There's Extinction Event, but the reason I kind of lean more towards Cry, even though it's a lot more narrow, is that just straight up says, I don't care about your cat. Because even if they do the sack shenanigans, it still gets exiled.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can have applications on other matchups too. Again, like Humans is a deck you could struggle with a deck like this. Though, you have your Thing in the Ice, you're probably okay in that matchup. But there's just definitely options going into the Rakdos Sac matchup, and definitely ways that you can make this matchup work better for you. And this deck with Opt, Consider, Treasure Cruise, it can go Mirror Breaker, it can go reasonably deep to find its sideboard cards. Right, in that matchup, a one-off in the sideboard, they probably had a reasonable chance to find it.
Yeah, I would agree. Might want to go Dig. I don't know, I feel like Dig might be better for that.
Yeah, it depends on how the mana base is constructed to a degree. Like, we saw Hull, which I was surprised to see, especially because there is access to Den, and if your mana isn't very blue heavy, which, you know, like treasure, if you go Treasure Cruise over Dig Through Time, and you don't have like cancels with upside, which I expect less in a deck that looks like this, that's definitely a way you can be a little more blue light, and then your hull could be a Den, and I think in most situations Den is a better manland, or even Hive.
Yeah, I would expect, honestly, pretty much the exact same mana base from Rakdos Midrange going into Grixis Midrange, still doing the 2 Den, 2 Hive, and then having more blue dual lands like Watery Grave, Steam Vents, that kind of thing. Just because it feels like the blue was a bit more of a splash. You saw some 1-drops and like Consider and Opt, Thing in the Ice, and then Cruise. Those were the only blue cards we saw.
Yeah, I think given how blue light this deck was, you could even... I don't know how... Obviously, we couldn't see the list. I don't know how many Triomes were in this list. I think the mid-range decks can afford fewer because they are generally like a Rakdos backsplashing blue, which is where the slow lands come in quite well, because once you reach turn 3, that's probably where you're going to want that blue splash, right? Yeah. You're going to want to cast a Treasure Cruise, cast a Nicol Bolas the Ravager, hold up a Spell Pierce while making a play. So you generally don't really need the blue splash that early, and you can get away with something like slow lands, so you have more untapped lands, so you can play a little bit faster. But yeah, that was the match. That was Rakdos Sacrifice versus a Grixis Midrange list. We'll be back soon with some more gameplay. We're also going to be featuring some paper games as well that I'm going to be recording at my LGS probably this Friday. So look out for that. Awesome. And we'll have some more decks to look from, and I think the paper one's going to be a bit more fun to commentate over than Moto. Yeah, I love commentating over paper. But we'll do some more Moto ones as well, hop into these random rooms and see what people are playing, see what people are testing, and hopefully we'll see some more spice. But that's going to do it here for us today on this episode of Questionable Commentary. Go ahead and leave a like and subscribe. Just a click from you guys goes a long way in growing the channel. If you want to see any specific matchups for our paper gameplay series, you can go ahead and leave a comment on what you want to see moving forward, and we'll go ahead and get that going for you. If you go into the description, you can see various amounts of links, Ink Gaming merch, the podcast Pioneer Perspective, the website playingpioneer.com, where you can find articles featuring myself and Alex, and of course Patreon, where you can get early access to episodes featuring extra content and more. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we hope to have you join us next time.